Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are looking at a system that is so fundamental,
Yeah.
so foundational, that without it, civilization as we know it simply ceases to exist.
It's the absolute bedrock of our survival.
It is. But it's also a system that's currently behaving like a runaway train, barreling toward a cliff edge that, honestly, most of us aren't even looking at.
And we are talking about food, but, before you think this is going to be a deep dive into recipes or the latest diet fad.
Or how to grow tomatoes on your balcony.
Exactly. I want you to just pause for a second. We aren't here to talk about what's on your plate for dinner tonight specifically. We're here to discuss a math problem.
A very, very dangerous math problem. It involves biology, it involves physics, and it involves, well, geometry. The space things take up.
So what's the core question then?
The core question is this. How does global food production collide with hard ecological limits? And, more importantly, what happens when the math stops working?
Yeah, because we tend to obsess over things like fossil fuels, transportation, heavy industry, all that stuff when we talk about the environment.
And rightfully so. I mean, those are huge issues.
They absolutely are. But if you actually look at the raw data, the single most destructive human activity affecting habitat and biodiversity isn't driving cars or building cities, it's farming.
Precisely. And the stakes, I mean, they just couldn't be higher. We're dealing with climate change, massive biodiversity loss, and the fragility of global food security all converging at once.
It feels like we're approaching a point where the very way we feed ourselves might destroy our ability to feed ourselves in the future.
That's the feedback loop we're in.
So just a quick disclaimer before we really dive in here. This deep dive is going to focus on agricultural systems, on land allocation, and on incentives. We are strictly analyzing the structural arguments presented in our source text.
Right, so we aren't here to offer dietary advice.
No. And we aren't here to condemn farmers who are often trapped in this system just like the rest of us.
And we're not promoting a specific ideology. We're here to look at the machinery of how we feed the world.
And the book guiding us through this machinery is titled Regenesis, Feeding the World Without Devouring the Planet, and it's by George Monbiot.
Monbiot is a really fascinating figure to anchor this discussion. He's a journalist, environmental writer.
But he's also known for being a bit of a provocateur, right? Even within the environmental movement itself.
He is. He doesn't just challenge the big, obvious industrial status quo. He also challenges the comfortable assumptions of the foodie movement, the organic movement.
He seems to challenge everyone.
He really does.
Yeah.
And Regenesis was apparently written in response to this terrifying realization he had. The idea that the current structure of modern agriculture, and that's both the industrial kind and the traditional romanticized kind, is just incompatible with ecological stability.
So he's saying we are operating on myths rather than metrics.
That's a perfect way to put it.
That's interesting because usually when we hear about food systems, the argument is so binary. It's always big, evil corporations on one side.
Versus the wholesome local farmer on the other.
Exactly. But it sounds like Monbiot is suggesting that the structural problems go way deeper than just who owns the farm.
That's the key. It's about land use. It's about physics. He looks at this incredible post-war expansion of food production, which, in terms of sheer calories, was a miracle. We produced more food than ever before in history.
But at a cost.
At a huge cost. We did it by turning the planet into a machine, and now that machine is overheating.
So let's start where the book starts, because it's a surprisingly personal entry point for a book that's about global systems and, hard statistics. Monbiot begins in his own orchard.
That's right. He describes this beautiful little orchard in Oxford. He's an amateur grower, and you can tell he just loves these trees.
He lists the apple varieties with such affection, things like the Ashmead's kernel, which he says tastes of caraway.
Or the Reverend W. Wilkes, which puffs up like wool when you bake it.
I loved that detail about the pear blossoms smelling like anchovies. It's such a specific and kind of weird sensory detail.
Distinctively revolting, as he puts it.
Right.
But the whole point of this beautiful opening is the pivot. The moment he realizes that while he's looking up at the blossoms and the fruit, admiring all this visible nature, he knows almost nothing about what is happening directly beneath his feet.
He makes this really honest confession that despite having a degree in zoology, despite spending his entire life as an environmentalist, he had completely ignored the single ecosystem that provides 99% of all human calories.
The soil.
The soil. So he decides to actually look at it. I mean, really look at it. Not just as dirt that holds up the roots, but as a system.
And what he finds is, well, you said it before, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Mhm.
He calls it an alien empire.
An alien empire. So what does that even mean? What's down there?
It's incredible. He describes taking a shovel, digging up a specific patch of earth in his garden, and just using a small magnifying glass to see what's there. And the diversity is just staggering.
It's not just a few worms.
Oh, not at all. It's a civilization, a thriving, complex, microscopic civilization.
And the names of these creatures alone are fantastic. He talks about springtails. What are springtails?
They're these tiny furred creatures that he says look like knitted toys. They are ubiquitous. I mean, they are in Antarctica, they're deep in the soil, they're on the surface.
And they're survivors.
They've survived every single extinction event for 400 million years. And in a single square meter of soil, you might find 100,000 of them.
100,000. I can't even picture that.
It's almost impossible. They're basically the cleanup crew of the entire planet.
And then there's this thing he calls the enigma of the Orobateds. It sounds like a spy novel title.
It does, doesn't it? But it's a major scientific mystery. Orobated mites. So in a single handful of soil, you might find 100 different species of these tiny mites. Okay. Now, in ecological theory, there's something called competitive exclusion. Usually, one species dominates a niche. If two animals eat the same thing and live in the same place, one will usually outcompete the other and drive it out.
But not here.
Not here. You have hundreds of species coexisting, all seemingly doing the exact same thing. And science still doesn't fully understand how they manage it. It's a total enigma.
And he even finds a creature called a symphalid.
Right.
Which turns out to belong to an entire phylum of life he'd never even heard of. A whole phylum.
I mean, that's like discovering a category as big as mammals or fish, just chilling in your backyard.
It's unbelievable.
And it highlights this central tragedy that Monbiot points out again and again. We know more about the movement of celestial bodies, planets millions of miles away, than we do about the soil right under our feet.
And that ignorance is dangerous.
It's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Because we treat soil as a dead chemical substrate. We treat it like a sponge that we can just pour chemicals onto and expect it to work.
But the whole point of this part of the book is that soil is not a sponge, it's a biological structure.
This is what he calls the theory of soil. It's not just ground-up rock. It's a self-organizing biological system. The bacteria and the fungi, they create what are called aggregates.
Aggregates, what are those?
Think of them as little clumps of earth. They're glued together by biological cement.
Biological cements.
Yes, slimes and glues and webs that are produced by the bacteria and the fungi. These clumps create the architecture, all the tiny pores and passages that allow air and water to penetrate deep into the ground.
So the bacteria are basically the architects and the builders.
They absolutely are. They're building their own city in a very real sense. It's a living structure.
And so when we disrupt that biology, the city collapses.
The architecture collapses. The soil turns to dust. This is what happened during the American Dust Bowl in the 1930s. He makes it very clear that wasn't just a drought. It was a systemic collapse of soil structure caused by plowing.
We destroyed the architects, so the building fell down.
Exactly. And that distinction between just dirt and living soil structure feels so vital. Dirt is just matter. Soil is a living system. And if you kill the system, you just have dust.
And once it's dust, it either blows away
or it compacts into something as hard as concrete that water can't penetrate, which leads to floods. The system breaks in multiple ways.
Okay, there's another concept in the book related to soil that completely changed how I view plants. It's called the rhizosphere.
Ah, yes. The root zone. This is where the chemistry gets really, really interesting.
So Monbiot explains that plants pump a huge percentage of the sugar they create through photosynthesis.
We're talking between 11 and 40%.
40%. They just dump it out of their roots and into the soil.
It seems incredibly wasteful, doesn't it? Photosynthesis is hard work. It takes a lot of energy. So why spend all that effort making sugar just to leak it out into the ground?
It's a bribe.
Essentially, yes. It's a trade deal. The plants are deliberately feeding specific bacteria and fungi that live around their roots.
And in exchange,
those microbes act like a sort of external organ for the plant. They fetch nutrients like phosphorus and iron that the plant's roots can't reach on their own, or they fight off pathogens, acting like an immune system.
The expert in the book compares this to the human gut.
It's a perfect analogy. We have a gut biome, a whole ecosystem of bacteria inside us that digests our food for us. Plants have an external gut.
So they can't carry their stomach around inside them.
Right. So they turn the soil around their roots into a stomach. They change the pH, they release enzymes, they cultivate this very specific bacterial community to digest the soil for them.
There's a story in the book's notes that illustrates this whole symbiotic relationship so perfectly, it's almost haunting. The one about Angel's Glow.
Oh, the Battle of Shiloh.
Right, so it's 1862 in the American Civil War. Soldiers are lying in the mud with these awful open wounds, waiting for help in the freezing cold.
A terrible scene.
And some of them start to notice their wounds are glowing blue. And the strangest part, the ones with the glowing wounds were more likely to survive.
It was a medical mystery for over a century.
And it turns out the glow came from a specific type of bacteria that lives inside a nematode, a microscopic worm in the soil.
Right. The nematode hunts insects, and the bacteria it carries produces an antibiotic to kill the insect's other pathogens, to keep the meal fresh, so to speak. And it seems those same antibiotics were cleaning the soldiers' wounds.
It's just an incredible example of the warfare and the alliances that are happening constantly, microscopically all around us.
It really is.
But let's zoom out, because Regenesis isn't just about bugs and bacteria. It's about how our complete misunderstanding of this microscopic world has led us to design a global food system that is, well, fundamentally broken.
And we have to map this system to understand why it's breaking. Monbiot argues we are currently in a state of what he calls agricultural sprawl.
We've all heard of urban sprawl cities expanding out into the countryside, but agricultural sprawl is almost invisible to most of us.
We just see it as the country.
Yeah. Green fields, what's wrong with that?
Except it covers 38% of the planet's land surface. 38%. That is a staggering amount of space. And a terrifying part of this is something he calls the global standard farm.
This is the idea that our food system is converging, right? It feels like we have endless choices in the supermarket.
A whole aisle for cereal, another for yogurt.
But the book argues that's basically an illusion.
It is an illusion of variety. Globally, we rely on a tiny handful of crops. We're talking wheat, rice, corn, soy, and a few massive corporations to process and trade them. The system has become incredibly efficient, but it has lost all its redundancy.
It's like a financial market where everyone is invested in the exact same stock. If that one stock crashes, the whole system crashes.
That's a great analogy. And Monbiot uses a term from systems theory to describe the state we're in now. It's called flickering.
Flickering, what does that mean?
Well, think about a light bulb right before it burns out.
It
Flickers, right? It becomes unstable. In systems theory, flickering is that period of intense volatility just before a complex system hits a tipping point and collapses.
So where do we see that flickering in the food system?
We see it everywhere. Prices spike dramatically, supply chains break, weather patterns shift violently and wipe out harvests. Monbiot argues the global food system is flickering right now. We saw it with the supply chain issues during the pandemic, and we see it with grain prices fluctuating wildly because of geopolitical conflicts.
So the system is brittle. It's efficient, but it's brittle. And a huge driver of this instability and this massive land sprawl is livestock.
And this is where we get into the most contentious part of this deep dive. The livestock dilemma.
Okay, let's unpack this really carefully, because the common perception, the story we all tell ourselves, is that the problem is factory farming.
The industrial feedlots, the battery cages.
Right. And so the solution, we're told, is pasture-fed, free-range, grass-fed meat. We see a picture of a cow on a green hill, and we think, that's it, that's sustainable, that's nature.
Monbiot takes a sledgehammer to that image, and he does it with data. He argues that while factory farming is cruel and polluting, and he's not defending the ethics of a feedlot at all.
Of course not.
Extensive farming, the pasture-fed, traditional kind, is actually worse for the planet in terms of land use.
Okay, that is extremely counterintuitive. I think most people, myself included, would assume the cow on the hill is the gold standard. How can it possibly be worse?
It comes down to what he calls the efficiency paradox. Grass is actually quite hard to digest. It's low in energy. So a cow eating grass takes much, much longer to reach slaughter weight than a cow being energy-dense grain.
So it just lives longer.
It lives longer, which means it spends more time breathing, burping methane, and crucially occupying land. A single pasture-fed cow can require significantly more land than a grain-fed one to produce the very same amount of meat.
So let me get this straight. If we switch the entire world to grass-fed beef tomorrow,
we wouldn't have enough planet.
Not even close.
Not even close. We would need several planets, actually. We'd have to cut down every remaining forest and convert it to pasture just to meet the current global demand.
And this brings us to a concept that I think is the most important metric in the whole book: carbon opportunity cost.
It is absolutely crucial. We usually measure the carbon footprint of a farm by what it emits. The tractor fumes, the nitrous oxide from fertilizer, the methane from the cow burps. That's the debit column.
Right.
But carbon opportunity cost asks a completely different question. What would this land be doing if it wasn't a farm?
If you took the sheep off that hill in Scotland, what would happen?
In many places, like the UK, it would revert to forest, temperate rainforest, or wild wetland.
Mm.
And those ecosystems are incredible carbon sinks. They absorb massive amounts of carbon from the atmosphere.
So by keeping the land as pasture, we are preventing that carbon drawdown.
Exactly. We aren't just emitting carbon, we are blocking the planet's own ability to heal itself. It's a double whammy.
There's a really striking comparison in the source text. He notes that a single kilo of beef protein has a carbon opportunity cost roughly equivalent to a transatlantic flight.
And that includes pasture-fed beef. In fact, sometimes the opportunity cost for pasture-fed is even higher, precisely because it uses so much more land per kilo of meat.
So why do we not see this? When I see a sheep on a barren, treeless hill in the Lake District or in Wales, I think, look at that beautiful, rugged landscape. I don't think, look at that ecological disaster.
That is what Monbiot calls the narrative shield. We have a profound cultural blind spot. We view that landscape as natural because of centuries of poetry, art, and romanticism. Wordsworth, the Romantic poets.
It's baked into our culture.
It is. We see green and we think good, but often that green is just a monoculture of ryegrass that supports almost no biodiversity. It's what ecologists sometimes call a wet desert.
It's the pastoral myth. We want the red barn and the grazing animals because it feels wholesome. It feels connected to our history, to some idyllic past.
But he argues that this myth obscures a devastating reality. Farming is the single greatest cause of habitat destruction on Earth. And livestock takes up the vast majority of that farmland, something like 80%, while providing a tiny fraction of global calories, maybe 18%.
The math just doesn't work.
The math is terrible. It's a problem of perception. We see the animal, but we don't see the missing forest.
We see the presence of the farm, but we are completely blind to the absence of the wild.
Exactly.
So we're stuck in this dilemma. If the natural way extensive grazing isn't the solution because it uses way too much land, and the industrial way factory farming isn't the solution because it's cruel and polluting, I mean, what's left? What is the solution?
Monbiot frames the choice we have as sparing versus sharing.
Right, let's define those terms. So sharing is the idea of doing low-yield farming everywhere, trying to mix nature and agriculture on the same plot of land.
Correct. This is often the ideal of the organic movement or something called agroecology. But because the yields are lower, because you're sharing the space with beetles and birds and wildflowers, you have to farm everywhere to feed the global population.
Which leaves no room for true wilderness.
None at all. The whole planet becomes a kind of managed parkland.
And so sparing is the alternative.
And this is what Monbiot argues heavily for. Sparing means producing food as efficiently as possible on the smallest amount of land possible so that you can leave the rest of the planet alone to rewild.
So shrink the footprint of farming so nature can expand.
That's the goal. High yield, small footprint.
But wait, does high yield just mean more chemicals? Does it mean going back to destroying the soil with industrial methods?
Not necessarily, and this is where the book really shifts from critique to exploring potential solutions. He presents three main technological pathways to achieve high yields without destroying the planet. And they range from the surprisingly low-tech to the incredibly high-tech. The first one takes us right back to the soil. He calls it the soil-first approach.
This is the part that focuses on a farmer named Ian Tolhurst, or Tolly, and he runs a stock-free organic farm.
Stock-free is the key word there. It means no animals.
No animals, and crucially, no animal manure.
That's the really radical part for an organic farm.
It is. I mean, organic farming usually relies so heavily on manure to replace chemical fertilizers. So if you aren't using chemicals and you aren't using manure, what on earth are you using for fertility?
That's Tolly's big innovation. He argues that relying on manure just imports nutrients from what he calls ghost acres.
Ghost acres.
Yeah, the land elsewhere that was used to grow the feed for the animals that produced the manure in the first place. You're just moving fertility from one place to another. You aren't actually creating it on your farm.
So he wants a closed loop.
Exactly. So instead of manure, Tolly uses ramial wood chip.
Which is basically just twigs.
Chopped up branches and twigs from the trees and hedges on his own land. He spreads them on the soil to mimic a forest floor.
We're back to that soil as a forest idea.
We are. The wood chip breaks down slowly, and it feeds the fungi and bacteria, those architects we talked about earlier, which in turn feed the plants. He is building soil fertility year on year rather than depleting it.
And the results?
His yields are incredibly high for an organic system, and he has very few pests. It basically proves you don't need animals to farm vegetables effectively. He's closing the loop on his own farm.
It's amazing because it just completely challenges that core assumption that you need animals to have a cycle of life on a farm. He's saying, well, the forest manages just fine without cows. Why can't the farm?
It's pure biomimicry. But, Tolly is growing vegetables,
Yeah.
cabbages and potatoes. That's great. But it doesn't feed the world's staple diet. What about bread? What about the big crops, wheat, corn, rice, that cover millions and millions of acres?
And that brings us to solution number 2, perennial grains.
This is fascinating work being done by institutions like the Land Institute in the U.S. You see, almost all of our major grain crops today are annuals.
Meaning we plant them, they grow, we harvest them, and they die, all in 1 year.
Correct. And then, every single year, we have to plow the field again, destroying the soil structure, releasing carbon and plant new seeds.
It's an endless cycle of disturbance. Every year, we reset that ecosystem to zero.
But perennial plants live for many years. They put down these deep, massive root systems that stay in the ground year-round.
Like the original prairie grass in North America.
Exactly. Those roots prevent erosion, they build soil carbon, and they access water from deep underground, making them more drought-resistant. The Land Institute is developing crops like kernza, which is a perennial wheatgrass.
So if we could switch our grain belts to perennials,
We could stop plowing almost entirely. The soil could finally heal and regenerate, and we'd still get our flour for bread and pasta.
it sounds like the holy grail of agriculture. High yield, no plowing, soil restoration. Why aren't we doing it everywhere already?
It's just incredibly difficult breeding work. It takes decades to domesticate a wild grass and breed it for high yields and good taste. But the progress is accelerating. However, Monbiot's third solution is by far the most radical.
This one basically bypasses the farm altogether.
It does, farm-free food.
Or precision fermentation.
Right.
And this is where it starts to sound like science fiction. I can hear the listeners recoiling. Lab-grown goo?
And look, the yuck factor is real. It's a huge hurdle. But the biology is actually ancient. It involves something called hydrogen-oxidizing bacteria.
Okay, you've got to break that down. How do you make food from hydrogen?
So you take a tank.
Hmm.
It looks a lot like a brewing vat for beer. You use electricity, ideally from solar or wind, to split water into oxygen and hydrogen through electrolysis.
Okay.
You then feed that hydrogen to specific naturally occurring bacteria in the tank. The bacteria eat the hydrogen and multiply like crazy, producing a flour-like substance that is 60 to 70% protein.
So you're essentially turning electricity and water into high-protein food.
Effectively, yes. It completely separates food production from photosynthesis. We aren't waiting for the sun to shine on a leaf anymore. We are powering the process directly with electricity.
And the statistics on the efficiency of this are just mind-blowing.
They really are. This process uses, according to the research he cites, 1,700 times less land than growing soy.
1,700 times.
Yes. Think about what that actually means for a second. A land area the size of a small country, say the size of Ohio or a small chunk of Europe, could potentially produce all of the protein the entire world needs.
And all the rest of the farmland. All those millions and millions of acres that are currently growing soy just to feed cows.
It could be rewilded. We could bring back forests, wetlands, savannas. We could pull billions of tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. It solves the land constraint problem completely.
This really brings it back to the theme of our show, crisis and perception. We are so used to thinking of food as something that must come from a field, under the sun, tended by a farmer.
It's a systemic blindness. We romanticize the natural aesthetic of the farm, but we completely ignore the opportunity cost. The missing rainforest, the missing predators, the missing biodiversity that could be there if that farm wasn't.
Monbiot has a great comparison for this kind of shift. He likens it to the transition from the horse to the car.
Or from whaling to kerosene.
Yep.
That's a great historical parallel. We didn't stop hunting whales to near extinction because we suddenly got moral about it.
No, we stopped because we found a better, cheaper, more efficient fuel source for our lamps.
Exactly. And Monbiot suggests that precision fermentation could make animal slaughter obsolete not through guilt or moral campaigns, but through pure economics and efficiency.
So if this bacteria-based protein is cheaper, cleaner, and uses almost no land, Why would we continue to raise billions of cattle?
Well, we might continue for luxury markets or for cultural reasons. But the bulk of the industrial meat system, the cheap burgers, the chicken nuggets, the fillers, and processed food, that could all disappear.
It would be a true regenesis, a new beginning. But it requires us to abandon thousands of years of tradition. It requires us to be okay with eating bacteria instead of beef, and that is a massive cultural leap.
And that is the entire hurdle. The technology is coming, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
The question is, are we culturally ready to separate food production from the land? Are we ready to accept that natural doesn't always mean better for nature?
It forces you to ask, what is natural anyway? Is it natural to clear a rainforest to graze cows? Or is it maybe more natural to use a high-tech tank to make food so that we can leave the rainforest completely alone?
That is the core ethical question of the book. It asks us to stop judging food by its aesthetics, the red barn, the green hill, and start judging it by its systemic impact, its land use, its carbon cost, its water use.
It's a shift from an aesthetic morality to a systemic morality.
A profound one.
So after all this, what does it mean for us, for you, the listener?
I think it means we need to become better systems thinkers. When you look at a landscape, look deeper. Don't just see the scenery. Try to see the ecology. Ask what is happening in the soil. Ask what used to be there before it was a field.
And when you look at the food on your plate, consider the land footprint behind it. Consider the opportunity cost.
And consider the soil, that alien empire right beneath us. It's so strange to think that the most sophisticated, life-giving technology we have might just be the bacteria in the dirt. Or, for that matter, the bacteria in a tank.
We seem to be on the cusp of a major disruption. The current food system is flickering. He makes a compelling case that it cannot hold.
So the future will either be a chaotic collapse, or it will be a managed transition to something radically different, something that spares the planet.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If Monbiot is right, and if we could feed the entire world on a tiny fraction of our current land using these new technologies, what would we actually do with all that spared land?
That is the ultimate political question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the question that really keeps me up at night. If we free up 30 or 40% of the planet's land surface, who decides what happens to it?
Who gets it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Would we truly rewild it? Would we give it back to nature and to indigenous communities? Or would we just find a new way to exploit it? Would we turn it into golf courses and luxury estates and data centers?
The technology gives us the option to save the biosphere. It doesn't guarantee we will actually choose to do so.
The potential for regenesis is there, but the choice is ours.
We'll leave you to chew on that. Regenesis by George Monbiot is a dense, challenging, and I think incredibly important read. We highly encourage you to pick up the full text to dive deeper into the science of soil ecology. We really barely scratched the surface of the nematodes and the springtails.
There's so much more in there.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis and Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.